Hi, I'm Luna. Welcome back to Luna ơi! In my last video, I talked about how Western media spread the disinformation and fake news about Vietnam. I hope it will be a while before I would have to make another video with the same topic. But, well, right after I published that video, another news site released the worst article yet about Vietnam. It's extremely wrong and needs to be properly addressed. I haven't seen anyone else address it thoroughly yet, so here I am to talk about it. On May 12, Foreign Policy, an American news publication founded in 1970, published an article about Vietnam and how we were able to successfully contain the virus. Bill Hayden and Linh Phương Nguyễn are the authors of this article. Here's the title: Vietnam's coronavirus success is built on repression. The Communist Party's tools of control made for effective virus-fighting weapons. What? Repression? What? Alright, calm down, Luna. Let's read the article. Let's see what they have to say. When the Hanoi-based economic consultant Raymond Mallon returned home after a trip abroad in late March, he was immediately texted by the local police asking after his health. Vietnam is a state that not only knows where you live, but also knows when you go away and your mobile phone number.
Hi, I'm American Johnson. I've been living in Vietnam for 8 years and I've definitely never been called by the police. The police do not know my phone number. In fact, I bought my SIM card for like $5 from a little shop and I paid with cash. The government doesn't know my phone number. I did have to register my address with the police, like any foreign national in any country. But yeah, all through this COVID-19 crisis, I haven't been called by the police. I haven't been contacted by the police. In fact, in the 8 years that I've lived here, I've never had to talk to a police officer. But yeah, basically the entire time I've lived here in Vietnam, all 8 years, I've never had to talk to the police one single time.
Let's keep reading. The degree of control matters because Vietnam has been widely praised for its success in tackling COVID-19. As of May 12, the country had, according to official statistics, suffered no deaths from the virus and had limited total infection to just 288, despite being next door to China and a popular holiday destination during the Spring Festival, when the coronavirus first hit the Chinese city of Wuhan. This has led many observers to suggest that the country's pandemic control strategy could be a model for others to copy, especially for developing countries. But that is unlikely to succeed because few other countries have, or want to have, the structures of control that Vietnam possesses. After reporting some undeniable positive facts about Vietnam, they immediately ended their paragraph by saying, few other countries have, or want to have, the structures of control that Vietnam possesses. Are you freaking kidding me? Are you sure you've been in Vietnam this entire time? Structures of control? We have been in Da Nang since the pandemic began. Do you know what happened as soon as the pandemic started here in Da Nang? The cops disappeared. Usually every day you see some cops on the streets regulating traffic, but we didn't see any for the duration of the lockdowns. We even have video of the empty streets, and we never got visited or harassed by any police. We never saw any police this entire time. We hadn't traveled recently, so of course they left us alone. But of course, if we travel recently, we would want health officials to come check on us and ask us about our travel history and give us free testing and medical care if we needed it. Who wouldn't want that during a global pandemic? But anyway, don't take my word for it. I know there was a bigger police presence in Hanoi where the crisis was the worst. So let's see what the people of Vietnam have to say. I found 2 different reports on what Vietnamese people think of the Vietnam government's response. One report from a private company called Black Box Research ranked Vietnam as number 2 in the world with a score of 77 out of 100. Vietnamese citizens were interviewed by this independent research company and asked about their approval of Vietnam's government response. Dahlia Research did another report in which Vietnam ranked number 1 in population satisfaction. This study interviewed almost 3 times as many people as the Black Box report and had a more detailed breakdown of results. 62% of Vietnamese said that the government here is doing the right amount of response. 13% of Vietnamese said their government was doing too little while 25% said too much. By comparison, globally, about 43% of people said that their governments were doing too little to protect people from COVID-19. So are you sure, Bill Hayden, that few other countries want to have the structures of control that Vietnam possesses? Because according to this report, 43% of the world outside of Vietnam wants their government to do more. But obviously, something must have been going on with the government control if this guy Raymond Marlin was being tracked so closely by the Vietnam government, right? Well, it turns out that Raymond Marlin himself replied to Bill Hayden's article on Twitter. Two Taste Westerners quoted in this article were never contacted by the author. Both states actually tweeted positive assessments of the way the pandemic has been managed in Vietnam. He even tagged foreign policy, but, of course, there was never a reply. So, a so-called professional journalist from Reuters quoted a man without contacting him. How hard is it to just DM him via Twitter and ask him for permission and clarification to see what he really meant in his comment? Of course, they didn't do it because their purpose was to distort the information and twist the meaning of his original post to fit the anti-Vietnam agenda of the article. They never cared about his real opinions. They used his words for their own propagandistic purposes, and that's why they never dared to contact him. Well, I, as a non-professional journalist seeking for the truth, did contact Raymond Marlin and asked for his permission to post his original tweets and asked him for clarification. And he welcomingly sent me a list of the posts that he made about his experience in Vietnam during the pandemic, which inspired the article of the foreign policy. And this is what he really said. This Vietnamese police texted us to ask about our health after our flights back to Hanoi. We sent a picture of us with masks on watching TV. He sent a meme back with a pumping heart and asked if we're really wearing masks inside. Also received mass text messages from Prime Minister's office and Ministry of Health with advice today. Impressive communication effort. The police was actually very cute, huh? A meme with pumping heart. And actually, at that time, I also received messages every day from the government to give me health advice to protect myself in the pandemic. They were all automated and sent to every single phone number in Vietnam, but still very helpful. In another tweet, Raymond Marlin said, appear to be expanding COVID-19 testing in Hanoi. We had swabs taken at home 8 days after being in home quarantine after flying back from Australia. Very professional and sympathetic medicals. Yes, and the testing and quarantine fees are totally free for everyone. And if you have to do home quarantine, you will get free fresh food every day. How awesome is that? Inspiring. My daughter was looked after as one of the 15 March arrivals, which included infected persons. Thanks for the kindness shown by the military staffs. When flying out of Melbourne on 16 March, no airport inspection. Precautionary advice provided by Vietnam Airlines on check-in. Temps checked by VNA prior to boarding. One passenger not allowed to board. Easy and sensible precaution. So what Raymond has described in these tweets is the unfiltered truth about how Vietnam defeated COVID-19. And if you want to know more about this, I cover this a lot in many of my previous videos. The links are in the description. Long story short, we were successful because we took the virus seriously from the start. We gave people free testing, healthcare, and food. We had to track people down because we needed to know where they had been traveling so we could give help to anyone that needed it. Because if someone tested positive to carrying the deadly virus and disappeared in the community, they could spread that virus all over. And if that happened in Vietnam, it would be really bad. You have to understand, my country is still very poor. From over a century of French colonialism and being bombed into the Stone Age by the USA only 40 years ago. We are still rebuilding. We are still fighting unexploded bombs and landmines in our villages every year. The war isn't really over for us. We are still recovering. So we only have less than 300,000 hospital beds for a population of over 97 million people. If this virus spread uncontrolled in our country, it would be a calamity. And I am sure Bill Hayden would have written an article criticizing Vietnam for failing in containing the virus as evidence for why our socialist government sucks. Todd Pollack, the country medical director of the Partnership of Health Advancement in Vietnam and a specialist in infectious disease, ascribed Vietnam's success to three factors. Its relatively young population. Just 12% of Vietnamese are over 60, compared with 22% in the United Kingdom. Rigorous testing combined with the early hospitalization for those found to be infected, and diligent contact tracing and isolation. It is the last of those three, the tracing and isolating of infected people, that enabled Vietnam to get its outbreak under control. As Matthew Moore, a Hanoi-based official from the U.S. Center for Disease Control and Prevention, told Reuters, the steps are easy to describe but difficult to implement. Yet they've been very successful at implementing them over and over again. Okay, thank you for your kind words about Vietnam, Todd Pollack. That was pretty good summary. But about Matthew Moore, you said they've been very successful at implementing them over and over again? This is a bit vaguely worded and can sound scary out of context. It almost sounds like we track and trace citizens all the time. Without a specific number of times the strategy was used, it's hard to tell. So let me just say, we have done this exactly 2 times before, once in 2003 when we had SARS, and again in 2005 when we had the bird flu. So, over and over again was really literal. They did it once, and once over again, and that's all. 3 track and trace programs in 20 years, and 2 of them were 15 years ago. You see, Vietnam doesn't do this tracing all the time. This is just a temporary strategy to fight contagious virus, and it will end whenever the pandemic is gone. All people living in Vietnam know that this is to protect our lives, so we don't have any problem with it. As the government rating report I mentioned earlier confirmed, except for a few rich assholes who refuse to go to quarantine and spread the virus to many of their family members, which almost got them killed. And a couple of wacky foreigners who decided to break out of quarantine to go on train rides and trick themselves into hotels. Most of us were happy to participate, not comply, but participate voluntarily. In fact, at the very beginning of this crisis, before the lockdown and before masks were mandatory, EJ went out without a mask one time, and all the local people and shopkeepers gently encouraged him to wear a mask. We have all been in this together from the ground up. Nobody is holding a gun to our heads, telling us to wear masks and comply with the lockdowns. By any large, Vietnamese people have been very happy to participate and help out. We have had local people helping to make masks and face shields, volunteering to help foreigners in quarantine, volunteering to risk their lives helping out in hospitals with COVID-19 patients, and doing all kinds of things to help with the response. This was not just the government forcing us to comply. This was a voluntary mobilization of our entire nation. In fact, in all my research and all my time living through this crisis, I am not aware of one single incident of violence or abuse of power related to the COVID-19 lockdowns, unless you count the guy who punched the cop when the cop asked him to wear a mask. That's the only violence or threat of violence I know of at all. But the reason Vietnam's disease control mechanisms have been so effective, and the reason why they are unlikely to be copied, is that they are the same mechanisms that facilitate and protect the country's one-party rule. First, what does one-party rule have anything to do with this? As I said in my previous video, we let the doctors lead the pandemic response system and we follow their advice. Oh, maybe by saying one-party rule you mean instead of blaming and passing the buck to other parties, we spend all of our forces to fight the pandemic? We even postponed the National Assembly and turned many important meetings into online ones to work faster while still protecting people's lives. But as a matter of comparison, let's look at what the oh so superior two-party Congress has accomplished in the USA. They have the largest number of cases in the world, and the Congress and Senate had delay after delay mounting response to the crisis and dragged their feet, costing thousands and thousands of lives. And now the USA is opening back up the economy to increase the capitalist profits while the pandemic is still active and uncontained. Wow, your two capitalist party system sure is superior to our one-party system in Vietnam. Trump even wants to refuse to allow people to vote via mail. Because who cares if you get the virus or not? Once you're done voting, they are done using you. And if you don't want to risk your life and stay home instead of going to vote, good! It means your vote will never be counted. Great democracy system, right? Do you know how many White House officials got the virus? 1, 2, 3, or maybe dozens? Who knows? Who even knows how many people got the virus in the USA? Florida officially has the pandemic curve flattened, but they have a suspicious new pneumonia epidemic. Conservatives in the USA talk so much about China concealing the numbers, but the USA isn't even tracking countless COVID-19 cases. But Vietnam is the bad guy here, because we did some tracking and tracing and gave people free testing and food and healthcare and were completely transparent about the whole process and published all the data about who had it and who they were in contact very openly. Vietnam has standing armies of neighborhood wardens and public security officers who keep constant watch over city blocks. When required, they can be augmented by militia and self-defense forces with the ability to seal off entire districts. The structures that control epidemics are the same ones that control public expressions of dissent. Wow, standing armies of neighborhood wardens, public security officers. You mean these people? You know what they do? They direct the traffic during rush hour. They have no right to arrest anybody. Nobody in Vietnam sees them as a threat because they barely have power over us. All I have ever seen these guys do in my almost 30 years of life in Vietnam is direct traffic. That's it. My entire life, I have never had to talk to them and they have never approached me. They just wave their hands to help traffic move along. In fact, a few years ago, the real traffic police pushed to try to give the wardens the right to bring traffic violators to the real police to be punished for traffic offenses. But it was so unpopular that the law was abandoned. So now they are back to just waving people along in traffic. Oh, actually last month, when we still had the national quarantine, the beach near our house was blocked. So there were some wardens stand there to stop people from going to the beach. Me and EJ at that time didn't know about that new law yet, so we went on the beach to run. After 5 or 10 minutes, a warden blew a whistle at us from a far distance and said, "Please get off the sand and go home." They didn't even bother to go near us or threaten us at all. They just nicely asked us to leave. Actually, they seemed bored and didn't even want to stand up. It was kind of funny, and that was the entire story. It's hard for me to explain this to you, but to me, this part of the article about the wardens is actually hilarious. Because living my life in Vietnam, I have never thought of these wardens as scary or intimidating. They are usually old men and they have no power or authority, and I just only ever see them waving their arms in the heavy traffic, and that's all. So this is really a ridiculous part of Bill Hayden's fiction story. The article even said this. The structures that control epidemic are the same ones that control public expressions of dissent. Well, first, what do you mean by public expressions of dissent? Protests? Strikes? Terrorist actions? First, protests and strikes happen almost every day in Vietnam. According to reports I found, in 2018, we had 214 worker strikes. In the first 6 months of 2019, we had 67 worker strikes. These reports counted strikes with between 100 to 8,000 workers participating, and 82% of the strikes occurred at big international corporations. And you know what the police do in those protests and strikes? This! They just stand there and watch. There are no guns or tear gas grenades or any weapons. Workers have the right to strike in Vietnam, and as long as they don't cause any violence, they are safe to strike. About the terrorist attack. Well, if it's really a terrorist attack, of course the police will have to stop it by violence, just like other countries in the world. But even then, we use minimal response and have all kinds of laws to protect protesters. You can watch my video on propaganda against Vietnam for an account for a very interesting story where farmer took 30 police officers hostage and were never punished. And gangsters launched a terrorist attack against a village and were met with very minimal police response by international standards. To say that Vietnam is brutally repressive against protesters right now, while the USA is actually brutally attacking protesters in Minneapolis and other cities in the USA is absurd. I would like to see any footage from Vietnam that look anything like what you see in Europe and USA, with police waging war on protesters in the streets and using tear gas, which has been outlawed for use in war by international law. But anyway, let's continue reading the article. Several countries have deployed police as troops in the war against COVID-19, giving them extra powers to impose social order. In the Philippine town of Santa Cruz, for example, police detained 5 Jews who violated the national lockdown in a dog cage. In March, France put 100,000 additional police officers on the streets to enforce its 15-day lockdown. But in Vietnam, police are not only watching you on the street. They track you to your front door through your phone and via your social media accounts. Oh, wow, so now you even compare Vietnam to Philippines and France? They reported horrible things the Filipino police and France did to their people and then said this. But in Vietnam, police are not only watching you on the street. The phrase "but not only" is only used when the subject did both the eating and the beating. In this situation, this is an intentional distortion of the facts and weaselly use of words. They imply that police in Vietnam did horrible things like the Filipino police and French police, even though they did not. The fact is, Vietnamese police only tracked people who were exposed to COVID-19 under the direction of health authorities, and there is no evidence at all that this power was ever abused. Actually, recently, some of my tweets about Vietnamese police giving free masks to people in the streets got a lot of attention from Filipino people. Thousands of them retweeted my tweet and wished that their police could be as nice as the Vietnamese. Continue the article. In late March, a number of COVID-19 infections were discovered at the Bạch Mai Hospital in southern Hanoi. In response, the chairman of the Hanoi People's Committee, Nguyễn Đức Trung, instructed thousands of police and local officers to visit every household in the neighborhoods, for which they are responsible. One resident, Đặng Bích Thảo, told Foreign Policy that the same evening, a local police officer knocked on her door and those of other households in a building to ask if they or their families had visited the hospital. Each inhabitant was checked against official residency list and asked to explain their recent activities. I felt like a criminal, Ngô Minh Hoàng told Foreign Policy, after a police officer knocked on his door in late March, asking if he had traveled abroad during the last 14 days. Although the police explained that the check was just for our own safety, I was still horrified, Hoàng added. Yes, this was what we did and it was what should be done. Let me remind you again, we only have less than 300,000 hospital beds for 97 million people. And no outside country is going to come rescue us if we have a terrible outbreak in Vietnam. I don't know who you are, Ngô Minh Hoàng, or if you're even real because I couldn't find you anywhere on social media. Or if your words were taken out of context like Raymond Marlin's. But anyway, you were right about one thing. You should have been horrified because you might have been carrying a deadly virus without knowing it, and you could have been endangering not only your own life, but also thousands of others, including your beloved family members. And thanks to the city health officials and tracking and tracing program, now you know your status and you know you will receive free testing, free quarantine and food and even free treatment if you had the virus. You and your family's lives may have been saved by these measures. While the government has technological tools at its disposal, the foundation of its enormous security capacities is a vast human intelligence gathering machine with the ability to trace and track individuals in person. Trung was the right man when it came to controlling the capital city. Until 2016, he was the director of Hanoi's police department. What do you mean when you say Chung was the director of Hanoi's police department? If you have any evidence to prove he's a bad cop and a bad leader, or overstep his authority in any way, prove it to us. Don't just sit behind the monitor and dishonestly imply such a vague judgment like that. Are you a real journalist, Bill Hayden, Nguyễn Phương Linh? On May 2nd, the authorities closed off part of the Hanoi suburb of Gia Lâm, quarantining 120 households, around 600 people, because one person was showing symptoms that could have been COVID-19. So-called district functional forces, uniformed police and militia, were pictured erecting barricades. Media photos also show the men without uniforms who hold the real power in these situations. They work for the Ministry of Public Security. Shadowy enforces a polo shirts and slack who can. Depending on the situation, dish out orders to local officers to summon up the heavy mob with a phone call. Okay, where's the photos? You mentioned the photos as they were important evidence, but I see no photo. You just described them as media photos. What? That's your source? Media photos? What do you expect from the readers like me? Should we just imagine the photos in our heads or go Google it in Vietnamese language by ourselves? Well, since you failed to provide those pictures, I will now, as a freaking YouTuber, tell you the true story with the actual photos. On April 24th, a worker living in Kiokit Wood got a fever which lasted many days. His family was scared, so they reported his case to the local government. They gave him a free quick test and the result was positive. That was why on May 2nd, the district government immediately sent an ambulance to take him to the hospital for a PCR COVID-19 test. To make sure the virus wouldn't spread outside of the village, 600 people from 120 families were in quarantine until they could receive accurate results. This was the right thing to do, and by every indication, everybody in that village understood, even though it was a bit inconvenient. This was to protect not only their own lives, but also the whole city's public health. And remember this, everyone who was quarantined was given free food and supplies, so it was actually not a big deal to them. The police and doctor came to the village to make sure everybody got help whenever they needed it, and made sure that nobody could go in or out of the village for the lockdown. There was no guns, no riot gear, no violence, no threats. And a few days later, the quarantine order was lifted because the test result turned up negative. End of story. The lockdown ended and things went back to relatively normal. These kinds of quarantines also happened in Italy when they locked down first the Lombardy city, then the whole country. Many nations have implemented these kinds of lockdowns to protect people because infectious pandemics are, well, infectious. But of course, in capitalist media, quarantine in developed countries is the right thing to do, but in socialist developing countries, it's repression, it's authoritarian. These are the same people who can barricade government critics inside their houses to prevent them meeting journalists, convene a neighborhood denunciation session to intimidate dissidents, or make sure someone's kid gets rough treatment at school if he or she makes too much noise about local corruption. The enforcers can be quite sure that their behavior is not going to be challenged by an independent judiciary because the Communist Party decides what the law is. It is any wonder that people obey instructions to stay inside the barricades when they live under a system that can make or break livelihoods by bureaucratic fiat. What are you even talking about here? You make all these claims with no citations or sources whatsoever. Are we supposed to just take your word for it? What kind of journalist are you? What kind of publication is foreign policy that it publishes unsourced and unsubstantiated garbage like this? If you have sources, share them. Or are you afraid? Maybe your sources won't stand up to scrutiny? Just like all the reports I've covered from Reuters and Human Rights Watch and other organizations that distort the truth to make Vietnam look as terrible as possible. I have a higher standard than this from YouTubers when it comes to citing sources, let alone a quote-unquote professional journalist like you. And of course, you didn't mention the fact that, in reality, we actually did have a journalist get COVID-19 because she tried to interview a COVID-19 patient. Bill Hayden, what do you think the word quarantine means? If we let dozens, even hundreds of journalists come in every day to interview people, how can we be sure that none of them will carry the virus out? You are free to go interview them after the quarantine is lifted, or even interview them online. Because remember, we still have internet access even under quarantine. When Da Nang was locked down, EJ and I still had weekly live streams and published YouTube videos and used Twitter and Facebook. You could have reached out to us or any other millions of Vietnamese people using the internet at that time. Nobody was stopping you. This article you wrote, Bill Hayden, was released about 10 days after the lockdown order was lifted. But did you go there to talk to those people? No, you did not. You just sit there in front of your computer and twist the story so it can fit your propaganda agenda. You said the Communist Party decides what the law is as a criticism for Vietnam. Can I ask you one question? Who decides the law in the capitalist countries? Who controls the Republican and Democratic parties in the USA? Don't tell me it's the workers, because it's not. Studies from Princeton and The Economist have both shown that the wealthy people control the politicians in the USA. Maybe that's why when the USA sent out stimulus checks, each poor worker received a one-time $1,200 check. Remember, one time only, not enough for renting a house for a month in most major American cities. Meanwhile, millionaires receive tax breaks of $1 million or more, and of course, that's just the tip of the iceberg. So I will stop digressing and get back to the main point. Vietnamese people obey quarantine orders not because we are scared of the police, but because we are scared of the deadly pandemic. How hard is that to figure out? Is it really that hard to believe? We didn't have any protests or uprisings or resistance at all for the police to even repress. If we did, where's the proof? Why didn't you put it in our article? Well, we are just halfway through the article, so let's continue. These are the actual mechanisms that make the difference between the notional pandemic preparedness that the United States and United Kingdom were taught to enjoy and the real deal that Vietnam demonstrated. They were born as tools of Communist Party control and have now been repurposed in the service of health protection. The same system born from the same roots made it possible for China to eventually control this outbreak, even after thousands of people died. The party's supporters will applaud its efforts and the domestic intelligence panopticon that made it possible. Those who are more skeptical about the surveillance states will be wary of trying to emulate its success. Wow, so now you even compare Vietnam, the UK, and the USA? Okay, so let's compare the oppression and spying of our governments. The USA is certainly willing to spy on its citizens. Edward Snowden proved that when he blew the whistle about massive NSA spying on USA citizens and people around the world, and the USA is certainly willing to deploy predator drones and spies into protests like the ones we are seeing in Minnesota right now. The USA and the UK are so willing to spy on citizens that they have been caught embedding undercover police in political groups who actually marry members of those groups they are spying on and have children. The USA is the country with the most COVID-19 cases in the world, 1.7 million cases, over 100,000 deaths. The UK ranks number 5 in number of COVID-19 cases, with 270,000 infected people, with nearly 40,000 deaths documented. But these countries are only willing to track and trace people when they threaten the interests of capitalists. They won't do anything to protect their own people when the real deadly threat of the pandemic virus is plaguing the world. Even with the pandemic still spreading, these countries are opening up their countries so capitalists can make more profits. You think the pandemic will stop just because you act like it doesn't exist? Is that the freedom you want? Is that the system that you enjoy? Sorry, but Vietnamese don't want it. No thanks. We are happy with our full containment of the virus, with less than 400 cases and 0 deaths. We are glad that we can now travel without any problems or worries. We can go out in the sunshine, enjoy the park, and have no fear. Our businesses are all open again, and we are free to move about without concern because our government took these basic steps to protect the people of Vietnam with our full support, cooperation, and voluntary assistance. And don't you even bring up China to try to get sympathy here. I am a huge critic of China's government for many reasons. But at least they are saving their people's lives, unlike the capitalist countries that you worship which are willing to step on poor people so the rich can get richer, but won't lift a finger to implement basic protocols to stop the spread of the highly deadly infectious virus. Carolina Mills, who runs a small island resort near Hoi An, described on Twitter in late February how this surveillance worked in the case of one French visitor. According to Mills, the Frenchman had been flagged with a higher than normal temperature on arriving in Bangkok some 20 days earlier. After 2 days passing through Cambodia, he arrived in Vietnam. Unknown to him, the Vietnamese authorities monitored his entire journey through the countries for 18 days. Within minutes of Mills logging his arrival at her hotel with the Immigration Service database, she received a phone call from the police. Officers were at the hotel to interview and test the Frenchman within 15 minutes. Okay, think back to the beginning of this video. Remember Mr. Raymond Mallon? The guy who said in one of his tweets that the two Westerners got quoted without receiving any contact from the newspaper, and they both had their word twisted from their original posts. Caroline Mills is the second person Mr. Mallon was talking about. Clearly, those so-called journalists didn't respect the truth and fact-fighting. Their purpose is to make Vietnam look ugly. They used innocent people's words dishonestly without asking for clarification, and when the people they misquoted called them out, these so-called journalists just totally ignored them. Anyway, back to the main story. The article says the Vietnamese police were very good at chasing tourists. Well, thank you for your compliment. Actually, it's not that hard. Whenever a tourist comes to Vietnam, they have to register the address of the hotel they plan on staying, and when they check in, the hotel will do their own registration. This happens in countries all over the world. National governments usually try to track the whereabouts of foreign nationals and the hotels they are staying at. You want to know why? So they can keep track of foreign nationals during national disasters. So they can have those foreign nationals stay safe and get home safely and report to their embassies if anything goes wrong. If Vietnam didn't keep track of foreign nationals and disasters like COVID-19 happened, we could be criticized. Reporters like Bill Hayden would talk about how incompetent our government is for not being able to find foreign nationals and make sure they are safe. The fact is, the Vietnamese police only used this information to visit the hotel and test that Frenchman. It took 10 minutes, then it was done. No investigation. This is a 100% free COVID-19 test. The military has also played a role in Vietnam's battle against the virus. 68 military camps with a capacity of 40,000 people were set up to receive people ordered into quarantine. Nguyễn Khanh, whose name has been changed to protect her identity, a 19-year-old who returned from studying in the UK and was quarantined in one of the camps, said she was woken up at 6 a.m. each day by a loudspeaker blaring a song declaring, "Our lives are a military march." Similar messages were also being broadcast outside the camp. Each morning, the loudspeaker found on every street corner in Hanoi were also praising the contribution of the military and law enforcement agencies in fighting the virus. Well, the article says 68 military camps, but actually most of them are just normal university-style dorms. Nothing scary about them. There were a lot of people, both Vietnamese and Westerners, who lived in these dorms for a couple of weeks during the quarantine, and many of them got interviewed. Here are some of their thoughts.
I personally think at this moment, as well as my whole family agree with me that it's safer to be here than it would be to be in the UK right now. I think it's important that people don't see this place as a prison. The doctors have said to me a million times they want me to go home. It's just they need to make sure that I'm safe and they need to make sure that I'm healthy. So I'm happy to be in this environment.
There's a few. So when I was sat right here in the middle of the night and I was filming a thunderstorm, that was so serene and peaceful to me, and it made me sort of rethink my perspective here of there's so much positive to take away from this, so much learning and growth that can be done.
You see, this was nothing like concentration camp or scary military prisons. Actually, we have nothing to hide. We let journalists visit these centers to talk to people, or of course you could just do some video calls because free Wi-Fi is always available. A bunch of YouTubers did this. Why didn't you? The so-called professional journalist Bill Hayden? Why didn't you do any reporting at all about the camps you talked about when you could have easily talked to people who were in quarantine while they were in quarantine? Do you need help installing Skype on your computer or something? Because I would be happy to come help if that's a problem. By the way, why did you have to change that 19-year-old girl's name to protect her identity? Protect her from what? Pictures and videos about our quarantine area are all over the internet, and she didn't even say any negative things about it. She just simply reported that she had to wake up at 6 a.m. with a loud song. Oh, the horror. Well, sorry that we played the song too loud. Actually, a lot of people who lived there for 2 weeks, at first, they complained about how annoying it was. Of course, it would not be as awesome as their home, but after a few days, they all said that it helped have a better daily routine. They woke up earlier, do a lot of workout, ate 3 healthy meals a day. In the afternoon, they play some games in the yard. At night, they play music together. It was actually really fun according to all interviews I've seen, which I will link to in the description. A lot of them said that it actually felt like it's a free 2-week vacation. But oh no, that was a loud song that woke them up early. What a human rights atrocity! Surely this is worse than the way the USA locks children up in cages and runs concentration camps for migrants. At the same time, the authorities were stepping up their efforts against unauthorized information. According to local news reports, between January 23rd, when Vietnam detected its first case of infection, police censored around 300,000 posts on news sites and blogs and 600,000 posts on social media about COVID-19. During those 2 months, police took action against 654 cases of so-called fake news and sanctioned 156 people. The overlap between the techniques useful for fighting misinformation and those for squashing political criticism is obvious. Vietnam sits at 175th on the Reporters Without Borders 2020 World Press Freedom Index. Wow, 300,000 posts on news sites and blogs and 600,000 posts on social media about COVID-19 was censored by the police? That's a lot! Where did you get these numbers, Bill Hayden? Well, our old friend Raymond Mallon did the research himself all over the internet, and this was the only original passage he found from a local newspaper. According to the statistics from the police force, since COVID-19 emerged in Vietnam, there have been nearly 300,000 news articles published online and nearly 600,000 articles and video clips related to the epidemic posted on social media state. Of these items, many contain unverified, distorted, untruthful content, drawing in millions of comments and shares. And here is the exact quote from Mr. Raymond Mallon. This means nowhere in the original news reports could we find or even interpret that the police has censored nearly 300,000 posts on the news site and 600,000 posts on COVID-19 on social media. We cannot know the number to many of these items, but to assume that nearly all of them are censored is just wrong. Misinterpreting this important detail serves the author's purpose, but nonetheless presents an inaccurate, incomplete picture of how Vietnam addresses the disinformation on COVID-19. Calling out or removing actual fake news is not unique to Vietnam. I want to say thank you to Mr. Mallon for providing me all of this important information. What he said is exactly what I want to tell you, and this is the truth that journalists like Bill Hayden and Nguyễn Phương Linh will never want us to know. Shame on the foreign policy for running this article, with unsubstantiated, made-up, distorted numbers and no citations whatsoever. This is pure dishonest propaganda with no truth backing it up whatsoever. It was also reported that police took action against 654 cases of so-called fake news and sanctioned 146 people. Why did you say so-called fake news? Based on everything I have seen, they are fake news. Here, I will show you some example with actual source. There's no COVID-19 death until now, but these people have been posting news about all the people who died because of COVID-19 since February. It's obvious fake news. According to your article, there were about 900,000 posts censored by the police, but there were only 146 people who got sanctioned. Well, I really would think that with that many censored posts, way more people would have been fined. Vietnam sits at 175th on the Reporter Without Borders 2020 World Press Freedom Index. Oh, don't even talk to me about this. This is absolutely a fraudulent report made up by another anti-Vietnam Western propaganda website, and I have a lot of proof. In fact, I will definitely make a video about this soon. For now, let me just point out the methodology of the Reporters Without Borders report. First, Reporters Without Borders handpick journalists to give a survey to. Reporters Without Borders writes the survey question and has their hand-picked reporters fill out the survey. That's it. That's the methodology. I'm no scientist, but to me, that seems pretty unscientific. I will link to the Reporters Without Borders methodology page so you can see it for yourself. It's a joke, and nobody should take it seriously. Go see for yourself. While some other Asian states, notably South Korea, have used phone tracking, credit card records, and video surveillance to trace the travel history of infected people, only Vietnam and China are able to combine such technologies with the street muscle to maintain direct personal control over large numbers of people. Only Vietnam and China are able to do so permanently without the need to submit to legal or parliamentary oversight. South Korea track people down by technologies such as phone tracking, credit card records, video surveillance, and that doesn't sound scary to you at all? Seriously? They know where you've been to, who you talk to, and how much money you spend on things, and that sounds normal to you, right? Of course it seems okay to you because South Korea is a capitalist country. Nothing is scary in capitalist countries, even if Google and Facebook and the CIA are monitoring everything you read and write on the internet. Actually, the South Korea tracking and tracing does sound scary to me. I think we Vietnamese would be very upset if our government tried to implement that kind of system. I don't think we would accept it. I really believe that compared to South Korea, our government did a very minimally invasive track and trace program. It seems to me like they collected the minimal amount of information they would need to protect us. They were not digging through my bank records and monitoring my phone, and I would have been pissed off if they did. But when countries like Vietnam and China implement our much less invasive track and trace program, you criticize us for being authoritarian. You think street muscle, and by that I mean the old man who sat on the beach and blew a whistle at me and told me to get off the sand, you think that's more scary than having the government trace people's phone and bank accounts in South Korea? If you have any evidence to prove that we use street muscle to harass people violently on the street, please share it with us. Bill Hayden and Nguyễn Phương Linh, I challenge you to do that. And I don't mean faking videos of people standing around in empty alley. Give us some hard evidence, any at all. Don't worry, if you respond to this video, I promise that I will not ignore you as you ignore other people who try to call you out for reporting wrong information. You can even come on my channel and speak out your mind if you like. I would love to talk to you. Alright, there's only one short paragraph of this terrible article left. Let's finish it. While the international community has criticized Vietnam's security apparatus in the past for violating its citizens' rights, the country has received near anonymous praise for its successful handling of the current pandemic. But the tools used are the same. For decades, the Communist Party has used surveillance, physical monitoring, and censorship to manage the population. The technique has become more sophisticated, but Vietnam does not provide a model that many other countries are likely to either want to or be able to implement. Nice summary, Bill Hayden and Nguyễn Phương Linh. Vietnam, a third world, a developing country, the country which has always been looked down upon by rich capitalist countries, now suddenly shows our strength. The fact that Vietnam is now becoming undeniable evidence that socialism works, of course it doesn't please the capitalist mindset. Vietnam can do it, but many other capitalist countries can't do it, just simply because those countries don't value human life. Vietnam would rather sacrifice our economy to save people's lives, just as our government officials have said. I made a whole video about it. And by the way, if you're skeptical, so I will link to that in the description as well. Meanwhile, your rich, powerful capitalist countries would dare open the economy back up to make the rich get richer and throw poor and minority frontline workers out there to die. After this article was released, there were a lot of people, both Vietnamese and foreigners, who called out the authors by name and tried to tell them how wrong the article was. Both Bill Hayden and Nguyễn Phương Linh ignored all of these criticisms. Instead of giving replies backed with sources in good faith, they tried to make fun of all those people and acted like they were all stupid people. After receiving a lot of reactions and feedbacks from viewers about this article, Bill Hayden posted this to try to defend his writing. Interesting display of disbelief to our foreign policy article, so here's a photo of the lockdown being enforced in part of Hanoi at the beginning of the month. And here's the picture of an empty alley with a bunch of people, just sort of standing around. Okay, well, good thing that he included a thorough analysis of this picture. Yeah, as you can see, this expert journalist kinda knows who the most of the people in the photo might be, what the uniforms probably mean, and he can guess how they might relate to each other. Well done, journalist! Okay, since I am actually Vietnamese and grew up seeing all these uniforms, maybe I can give you an actual analysis of this silly picture. Well, first of all, I don't see any guns or weapons. I don't see any riot gear or barricades or tear gas canisters. I don't see any signs of violence. I don't see any tanks or armored cars. I do see some shitty old motorbikes, and I see an ambulance. And I see a bunch of traffic guiding wooden guys and only one traffic police officer without any weapons standing peacefully next to an ambulance. Let me tell you explicitly, the guy in yellow, he's a traffic cop. Traffic officers in Vietnam do not carry guns unless it's a very special circumstance. And the guys in the blue uniforms are wardens. Remember, they don't even have the authority to arrest people. And the people not wearing uniforms, how is that evidence of anything? We don't know who they are. They're just standing around. They might be cops, just like the USA has the FBI and Secret Service who don't wear uniforms, or they might be health officers, or they might be government officers. Who knows? Who cares? Bill Hayden, what the hell does this picture prove at all? One of the replies to this photo said, "To my American eyes, that looks more like a maintenance crew than anything else." Well said. And my Vietnamese eyes solely agree. There is nothing sinister or nefarious about this picture. You have to have a very good imagination to see this picture and see an authoritarian repressive government in action. A Vietnamese Twitter account posted a link to an interview with a Western expert about COVID-19 and tagged both Bill Hayden and Nguyễn Phương Linh, hoping that they would see the truth. But you know what? Bill Hayden never replied, as usual. Nguyễn Phương Linh did reply, and this is what she said. "I haven't replied simply because I haven't watched the video and I don't plan to watch it." Wow, what an awesome journalist! You have a real nose for news, Nguyễn Phương Linh. I know if I were a journalist covering the COVID-19 response in Vietnam, I would also have no interest in seeing evidence that might contradict claims I made in an article. That's real journalistic integrity you've got there, Nguyễn Phương Linh. Honestly, you need to be real brave, but also a coward to say something like that. I am really kind of shocked. A so-called journalist wrote a controversial article, and when people nicely show them the source to prove that they might be wrong, she immediately refused to watch it. Wow, such a great journalist with great dignity. What kind of journalist are you, Nguyễn Phương Linh, when you happily bury your head into the sand and refuse to confront anyone with different ideas? And this is what the Vietnamese account Hải Đỗ replied. "I thought trợ lý nghèo, her pen name, would have an open mind to listen to people who have their boots on the ground. Well, obviously, she doesn't." There was some more people criticized her and her attitude, and this is Phương Ling's final answer. "A journalist's success is defined by their next story, not the last one." Wow, so finally you admit that this article is your failure, right? And you didn't even have the gut to say that frankly. I feel hesitant to even call you journalists, Bill Hayden and Phương Linh. Both of you are cowards. This was weak, lazy reporting. So many unsighted, unsourced claims. So many failures to do the most basic investigation. So many opportunities to do interviews with people you talk about directly and were just too lazy to bother messaging. So much speculation. So many falsifications. And when people try to correct you, you made fun of those people and refused to swallow the truth like children. Bill Hayden, another journalist on Twitter, told me that you've been living in Vietnam for 15 years. Well, if Vietnam is that awful, I have a suggestion for you. Why don't you just get the fuck out of our country and live in your capitalist paradise? The USA is burning right now with police shooting protesters in the street, and the pandemic is spreading like wildfire. I'm sure they would welcome you with open arms. Speaking as a Vietnamese woman, I personally do not welcome you here. The protection we've given you through this crisis is like pearls before swines. So please, feel free to leave. I for one won't miss your bullshit. But well, if you're nice people and you want to visit this beautiful and safe country, you're all welcome. That was all what I want to say. Thank you for watching. If you like my video, please subscribe and maybe consider being one of my patrons. See you next week. Bye bye.